everyone, welcome to the party. You are at the August online meetup for Rancher. We got a lot of cool stuff scheduled for you today. Today's August 18th, and oh, well, look at that, it's an agenda slide. So I'm gonna talk for a minute and give some housekeeping rules and stuff like that, and then you are here to learn about Rancher Desktop. Rancher Desktop is a fantastic new project from SUSE, and I got some great people here to talk to you about it. So we're going to do an overview of what it is. And then, of course, if you've ever been to a Rancher meetup before, you know that we are demo heavy. And then we'll have some Q&A available at the end. If you don't know who I am, my name is Adrian Goins. I'm a technical evangelist here at SUSE. And our speaker today is Matt Farina, who I saw just popped up on the screen. Say hi, Matt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Farina, software architect at SUSE, and I work on some of the new projects that we've got going on, and just trying to build new, cool, useful open source stuff.
Matt is so involved in Rancher Desktop. He and I have been talking about it for, gosh, I was still in Chile when we started talking about it. Months. And it's exciting to see the new developments that are coming out with Rancher Desktop every single week. Now, Matt's going to be doing the presentation, and I am just the MC, cat herder. But for Q&A, we are also joined by three other really smart engineers from SUSE: Jan Dubois, Eric Promislav, and Mark Yen. So, gentlemen, would you each like to take a moment and say hello?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jan Dubois. I work on Rancher Desktop, mostly on the backend stuff, the virtualization, not the user interface. Before that, I worked on Cloud Foundry for Kubernetes.
Hi, I'm Eric Promislav. I work mostly on the front end, and it's an Electron app, so it's like a compiled HTML, compiled web app. Before that, I was working on very much the back end of Cloud Foundry, mostly on the Cloud Controller as an open source participant.
Nice.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark. I basically do a little bit of everything, but mostly front end. Pretty much the same as the other two guys, so I guess that's it.
So these three gentlemen will be answering your questions in the questions panel. If you look at the GoToWebinar panel, you'll see a thing for questions. When you think of a question, just put it in there. Periodically throughout the demonstration, Matt's going to stop if he has a few seconds and ask if we have any questions, and we'll be answering questions live. Jan, Eric, and Mark are also going to be answering questions in the questions panel. And well, it's pretty easy. It's a webinar, right? The only thing that I ask is that you please keep your questions on topic for the information that we're discussing today. If you have other unrelated questions about Rancher or K3S or things like that, we're probably not going to have time to address them unless it's somehow in the context of Rancher Desktop. So we can take those questions offline in one of the following places. Well, we'll get to that slide in a second. This is a meetup. It's not a webinar. What's the difference? Well, we might go late, we might go early. Like, it's super casual. It's designed to give you information and the opportunity to see the things that we are making and to get you excited about using them, because we're excited. And well, if we make things and nobody uses them, it's nobody's fun. That's no fun. There are no bad questions. Ask your questions. There's no stupid questions. Just remember the context thing, just because we do want to try and keep things within a window of opportunity. I've hosted meetups that have gone for like 2.5 hours before. Whew. Maybe this will be one of them. We're going to do lots of demos. If you have questions about anything that Matt is demoing, because we might not get to it at that exact instant, just try and put a little context in your question and say, hey, when Matt was demoing this, can he show that or something like that? If we can show it, then we absolutely will. And because this is what it is with technology, things might break. If they do, it just turns into a live debugging session and we'll get it back online and things will be fine. First question we always get, is the meetup being recorded? And yes, it is. Once the meetup is done, it takes a little while for GoToWebinar to process it. I'll then just do some basic editing on it and we will put it up on the Rancher YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/c/Rancher. And so if you have to drop or if you missed anything, don't worry about it. Within a day or two, you'll be able to go back and watch. The resources that I was talking about a moment ago for where you can ask all of your questions, one of them is the Rancher user Slack. If you're not already here, you can get an invitation by going to slack.rancher.io. It's in the top left corner there. And you just enter your email address, and that asks Slack to send you an invitation so that you can come and join. There are tens of thousands of people registered. There are thousands of people online at any given point in time from the community, from Rancher, from SUSE, all of whom are here to help you be successful. So come join the conversation. And then you can also go and view and join the SUSE and Rancher community. This is the community of everything related to what SUSE is doing. It's new, but it's growing very rapidly, and we have educational classes there, we have articles, we have conversations. It's the place to go for social interaction that you can't get just from within Slack. So you've got those two resources available to you for anything that you may want to know about anything that we're doing. And with that, my portion is done. You'll hear from me again when we get to the Q&A portion, and I will hand it off to Mr. Matt Farina. You ready?
All right. Just a moment while I go to screen share here.
He's going to steal the presentation from me.
I'm going to steal the presentation. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, sir. You are up. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming to hear about Rancher Desktop. And Rancher Desktop is not Rancher on the desktop. Even though it has Rancher in the name, it does something different than what Rancher does. It's about Kubernetes and container management as a desktop app. And I like to ask the question, when you think of Kubernetes on the desktop, what do you see? What do you think of mentally? Maybe it's something that you use, but what do you think of in that space? Do you think of Kind? Kind is Kubernetes and Docker, and this was originally designed to test Kubernetes itself. They needed a way to test it as part of CI, to test different components and to work on it. And that need ended up creating Kind. Now, Kind has been used far beyond just using it in CI testing. Lots of people use it in their own CI testing for workloads and other things. And they even use it as a desktop environment when you need Kubernetes to get it up and running and you want to run a version locally to do your own development. It's grown far beyond what it was originally designed for. Or maybe you think of MiniCube, right? This is the longest running Kubernetes local development tool. You can use virtual machines with it. On Mac, that's actually how I got started. When I needed development environments here, I would use a VM, and it was quite often was MiniCube based. But these days, it uses Docker out of the box. If you don't specify otherwise, it looks for Docker desktop, tries to install what it needs there, and expects it to be running there. Or maybe you use K3S, K3D, right? Do you even think of K3S in this environment? I know I think of K3D. And when I started going through these things of what people were using, I noticed two themes kicking here, right? One is Docker is everywhere. You know, Kind is Kubernetes in Docker. MiniCube by default looks for Docker these days. And K3D, which is the easy way to run K3S on something like Mac, which is a really common thing to do, uses Docker. It's K3S and Docker, right? And you're also noticing that these are terminal applications. There's a terminal theme going on here. You jump into a terminal and you go for it. And I want to take a minute and just appreciate that some people love terminal and some people don't. And it took me a little while to understand why some people don't spend a lot of time in terminals and they like GUIs that guide them. And when I was reading something out of the Stack Overflow user survey that comes out every year, I was reading in the 2020 edition that it's about 40% of professional software developers learn to program within the last 10 years, in less than 10 years. And if you take it to all people who program, not just professionals, it's almost 50%, almost half of people have learned to program within the last 10 years. And that's a lot of context you need to know, right? You gotta learn programming languages, the area that you're programming in, whether it's game development or finance or healthcare. There's just a lot you need to learn. If you're using Kubernetes, you've got to learn Kubernetes. There's a lot going on. Learning, you know, awk and set and all these different terminal things that you may want to use. I can understand why people haven't dove into that with everything else they've got going on. So I've learned to appreciate the desire for GUIs that guide you because there's just so much. But you see this Docker theme going on here. Everything up to this point has been really Docker centric. And of course, Docker offers Kubernetes and many people may use it. But I'm reminded that Docker desktop isn't open source. And over here at SUSE, we are very focused on open source. You see the summer is open. We put out lots and lots of open source software, and Docker Desktop isn't open source. And it's coupled to Docker services. You log in, you have to interact with Docker services in order to do things. And one of the most important things is you get one version of Kubernetes. And I think this is really important. It's the version that they ship with. And the reality is, there are many versions of Kubernetes used in production. This picture is from the last in-person KubeCon. It was the main room where they fit thousands and thousands of people there. There were over 10,000 people in attendance. And when I look across, there's all these people, and so many people are running different versions of Kubernetes. I think of the Kubernetes fragmentation like people talk about Android fragmentation. There's just so much in use. And like if you go to the public clouds, they're not going to be using the latest version of Kubernetes 121. They're going to be on 119 because Kubernetes supports the last 3 minor versions, and they run with that oldest one until just before the next minor version comes out, and then they upgrade, right? And that has to do with things like stability and other stuff. But you see people running just this whole wide set of Kubernetes versions. And so if you're doing development locally in one version of Kubernetes, like you would in Docker Desktop, then if you've got to switch between versions, you may run into hiccups and issues. I know I have over time. Testing in different versions of Kubernetes I found to be incredibly useful because there are those little differences. You may think it's just a minor version upgrade, everything's backwards compatible, but Kubernetes doesn't follow semantic versioning. Sometimes things break, sometimes things have issues. And so trying to mirror what you're using in production can be a big deal, which is why you could sometimes see people leap to Kind or to MiniCube where you can specify those things. And what I realized was there were no great open source Kubernetes desktop applications. They just weren't there. Not in the sense of what people think of as a desktop application. And there is a need for it because so many people want to use desktop applications. The last one I could think of that was starting to build on it was a project called Cube Solo, which hasn't been around for years, but this was the last one I thought of that had potential. It was a Mac OS app where you could get Kubernetes running. It was based on Cross Linux, and it was quite a while ago, but that project has been archived and moved out of the way. And so that's where Rancher Desktop comes in. So what is Rancher Desktop? It is Kubernetes and container management. And here I've got the Containerd logo running on Windows and Mac. They were our 2 primary operating systems because this is what most people use as their local desktop development environment. Windows and Mac, they're the top 2. And so we targeted those and we wanted to make not just working with Kubernetes, but working with containers work well. This is the only, I'll say marketing and product slide you're gonna get, but I thought it captured the design goals. And the design goals were, we want you to be able to choose the version you want because there's all those things in production. We want you to have, if you go to the other side, seamless upgrade. And I'm not just thinking of the upgrade of the application, but testing upgrades, right? I'm running an application in Kubernetes 119, and now we're gonna upgrade production to 120. I wanna test out what does that upgrade look like, and I can test that out locally. So locally, I could upgrade my environment from 119 to 120, see what happens with my applications and Kubernetes resources. Does something break? Are there issues? You know, have that opportunity to test it out and see it. We wanted to leverage upstream projects because those are the projects that you're using in production, Containerd, things like that. You want that same environment. Easy installation, obviously. Completely open source. We want to not hide anything from anybody. We want it to be a completely open source project. And of course, Kubernetes native. If you look at Docker, it's very much Docker first, and then Kubernetes second is something you can add on. We wanted to go Kubernetes first because we do Kubernetes, and Kubernetes we think is a big deal. And so it's Kubernetes first and container management second. So I'm almost done with the slides before I get into demos here, but I did want to talk a little bit more about how Rancher Desktop works. As Eric said, Rancher Desktop is an Electron app, and it bundles KIM, which is the Kubernetes Image Manager, Kube Control, and Helm. And then on Windows and Mac, it does different things. On Windows, it uses Windows Subsystem for Linux v2, and it creates a distro there. If you don't have WSL installed, when you go and install Rancher Desktop, it'll install it for you. And we bring up a distro with Containerd and K3S inside of it. And then we wire up everything to work and try to work seamlessly, something I'll demo in a little bit. On the Mac side, we do things a little bit differently. You don't have WSL, and we use WSL rather than a VM because every version of Windows can use WSL. If you're going to manage virtual machines, then you need Windows Professional or Windows Server, something like that. Windows Home can't do those things, but Windows Home can do WSL too. And so we wanted to make Rancher Desktop and Kubernetes on the desktop widely accessible. On Mac, we use the hypervisor framework. We used to use HyperKit. Now we're using a new project called Lima, L-I-M-A, which is QEMU, Q-E-M-U based. And inside of there, we create a virtual machine that we manage. On WSL side, Windows does a lot of the management for us, but on Mac, we manage the virtual machine, and we set up Containerd and K3S running inside of there. And it's all managed by Rancher Desktop. And then we bundle these things, KIM, Kube Control, and Helm, to help make the process of working with those easier. Now, one of the neat things about the way that we do this is that KIM, all right, it has two sides to it because we are Kubernetes first. KIM on Mac or Windows, you're going to have a binary that you interact with, a CLI that you do things with. And then inside of Kubernetes, there's a daemon set with some stuff in it in Kubernetes that interacts with Containerd under the hood to deal with your image management. And so KIM talks with Kubernetes and talks with those things working there. And one of the neat things about that is if you use KIM build, and I'll demo this in a minute, to build something, it goes into Kubernetes, it's immediately built and available in Containerd, which means if you go ahead and deploy an application with those updates, there's no need to push or pull because Containerd has that image and it can just get started and do things with it. All right, that is the last of this stuff. And now I wanted to get into some demo and show some of this off. So hopefully you can still see my desktop here. What you have is, this is on Mac, and you can see Rancher Desktop. I've got a browser window open and a terminal open. The first thing I'll walk you through is a little with Rancher Desktop. This is the version 0.4.1 that was just released. And here we give you a little bit of information. You can get to Slack and come find us there. You see the project is still what we call an alpha status. We're working towards beta now. And you can get to the homepage and issues if you want to learn more or you want to file an issue or see if the bug has already been reported or request a feature. We have the Kubernetes settings, and this is an important part. Here we manage the virtual machine. Now, you get to choose your Kubernetes version. So if I click here, you'll see lots and lots of Kubernetes versions down to every patch version going back for many minor versions. When you change a version, it'll prompt you about what it needs to do. So if you change it and you're like, oh no, I didn't want it to change, well, it's gonna pop up an alert and ask you about it and present you with some information. You can also change your memory and number of CPUs you give it. This is going to be based on whatever your system is configured for. Here you see my machine has 16 gigs of RAM, and it's actually giving me a little red area saying if I use too much, system services will have trouble, and the CPUs on here. The port is the port that Kubernetes is exposed as. This was recently added in case you're running more than one version of, say, K3S, and each one wants to use the same port on localhost, they'll run into collisions. This gives you the opportunity to configure around that. And then supporting utilities here. Because we can't affect system-wide paths in all the same way, what we do is we link them into user local bin and Helm, KIM, and Kube Control. Now, if you already have something there, we're not going to wipe it out. We'll actually tell you what you already have linked there and not let you check the box. But this is how you go ahead and do that. We also have the ability to see the images that are installed and listed here. So here's all the images. And so you can see I've just got one, and I'm going to demo this in a minute. And troubleshooting gives you the ability to do things like a factory reset, and we'll be adding more here if you need help. So that's kind of the basic layout of things on Mac. There's a couple of differences I'll show you on Windows in a few minutes. So I've got this application running right here. You can see it. I'll go ahead and refresh, and you can see this is a live application. And this is running just directly out of that Kubernetes. And one of the things is you'll see it's on localhost port 32106. And that's because on Mac, when you open up something like a node port, it will automatically forward the ports from the virtual machine that's running under the hood to your desktop. It'll do anything that's above 1024. We're working on the stuff to deal with below 1024 here in the near future, but it automatically does it. And that's because the ones that are lower require admin permissions. It's not as straightforward. So right now I have a little app running. It's installed via Helm. It's called Anvil. It's what's going ahead and doing this, right? And so a simple demo here is I've gone ahead and I've modified my Anvil app, and now I want to go ahead and get the new thing running and see what it looks like. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this application. It's a Go app, and so I'm building a new binary here. And you'll see I've got the new binary now built. And then we're going to go ahead and do Kim build. And the last time I built it, it was 010. So now I'm going to go 020, and I'm going to go build a new version of this application. Now, Kim is Kubernetes Image Manager. This should look like just like using the Docker CLI, similar syntax. Some folks have just done a drop-in replacement and symlinked Kim to the name Docker, and many of the commands work because they try to work the same way. So here, we'll go ahead and build it. And this was a scratch image that just put a Go image in it, so it did it very quickly. What you'll see is this looks a lot like what you'll see from other tools. And that's because under the hood, Kim is using BuildKit, just like those other tools do. So it's building things the same way, and you get that same output. It just kind of works the same because it's the same underlying tools doing it. And that's one of those things that means you can kind of trust the builds because really it's the same library, same tools. It's just the wrapper around that business logic. So now, upgrade. Here's what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and upgrade this. Now what I'm doing is I'm setting the image tag to use the 020 version that I just built. And Helm is upgrading. And so now it should come live. And if we look at the PO, we can see it's switching from the old one to the new one. If we do it again, we'll see it switched. And that's because the image was already there. Kubernetes just had to do the logistics of switching. And so now if I come over here on that forwarded port, you can see what I rebuilt and updated the video to. You're welcome. You've been rickrolled. But you can see what's going on here and how it's able to just switch things out, and it just works and it forwards. Now you might be wondering, what happens if you do something bigger that has build steps and things like that? And so what I've got here is another piece of code. This is KubeWarden. It's one of the other projects that SUSE has been working on. This is a security one, and this is one of the components of it, a controller. You can see this is the source code. It's been checked out from Git. This is the tip of master. And so we could do, I'm not going to give it a tag or anything. We're just going to watch it build here. And so if I do this, what you're going to see is it's starting to build. And it's got to do all those little things. It's got to download stuff. Right now it's downloading other layers that are needed in order to build it, but it's going through that process. Now this is going to take a minute, so I might as well ask, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, there are questions at this point.
All right.
So we are getting a lot of questions about where this will run. Namely, will it run on Linux, and will it run on the M1 chipset for Apple?
All right. So it does not run in either of those environments yet. The M1 and Linux are both in our roadmap. With Linux, Mac and Windows are the top two environments. But Linux is actually steadily growing. So where Windows is seeing a shrinking amount of use, Linux and Mac are both seeing an increasing amount of use. And the most recent stats that I've seen say that Linux may actually just be a % or 2 behind Mac now. And so that is now in our roadmap, but we don't have it yet. Before we go to do Linux, we're actually going to work on M1 support or Apple Silicon support. And we recently got our hardware in because you need Apple Silicon hardware to do that. So when we first started, we wanted to make sure it worked on Intel, Apple, and Windows. And then we wanted to make sure that this project was something people wanted to use and liked and were using and were interested in. So we waited to see if it caught on at all. And once it did, we said, okay, now we need to support Apple Silicon. And so we ordered and we just got the hardware in, and it's set up for one of the future sprints coming up here where we're going to start digging into it. And that's one of the things Jan's going to do, is probably start digging into how do we make the virtualization and everything run. As a setup to that, to let you know, we recently switched from HyperKit to QEMU, so that way that would help set us up for that transition to Apple Silicon along the way and trying to make everything work well together. And so we're setting ourselves up there, and it's coming, but neither of those environments are here yet. I would hope they're here before the end of the year. That's my current hope. And that's what I'm planning on. As the person who plans things, I'm also planning on that.
Yeah. All right, that sounds like a good goal. Do you want another question, or do you want to continue? I see your terminal's back.
I've come back. Do you have one more? I can grab one more real quick.
Sure. Some people are also asking if this requires removing Docker Desktop or if they can work together, or not together, but side by side.
They can work side by side. I don't have Docker Desktop on this system anymore. I've been trying to fully move to this, but I did, and they work fine side by side. And you should have no problem running them, unless you're running them at the same time and the virtual machines use up a lot of resources, but that's about it.
Right. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Go back to your demo and just let me know when you want more questions.
Sure. So you can see now it worked. Now you're not going to see it. This keeps popping up. You'll see what I've built here because I didn't tag it. It's not showing up in just the default Kim images, but it was able to build this image, just random one. I pulled down one just for another SUSE project, and it just worked because it's able to just work. Now I'm going to jump back to this one here because I think upgrades are important. I talked about it before. So we're going to take this 119.13 that I've got kicking, and we're going to come all the way up to 21.3. And I'm going to say, okay, now you'll see it says changing from version, the old one to the new version, will upgrade Kubernetes. Do you want to proceed? If you were going to downgrade, now Kubernetes does not downgrade gracefully. It's designed to upgrade gracefully, but it doesn't downgrade gracefully. The old version doesn't know what you might layer into the new version. And so when you downgrade, you lose your workloads. That's just one of the things going on. But when you upgrade, you retain your workloads. So I'm going to click OK. You saw it. It should pop up here. It made sure it had Kubernetes cached locally. So one of the things it does is if it doesn't have that version of Kubernetes, it does have to go download some files because every version of Kubernetes is its own set of binaries and container images. And we don't keep all of that cached in the application. Anytime you switch versions to do any of that, we go fetch the necessary files, so you only have what's needed locally. By the way, you should see it's already done switching version because it took down the old one. I did have that version cached locally because I had used this version before. So all it had to do was shut down K3S and start up the new version. Now, what you'll see though is it's still there. It's starting up still, but my state and everything is still there. And now it's back up because everything's come back up. And so now, in theory, if I come over here and I hit refresh, it's still there. So I just tested now upgrading Kubernetes to see what would happen. Now, if I were going to go downgrade to some version, it'll prompt me and it'll warn you that it's going to reset everything. And so you can cancel it. I'm not going to do that here. And it'll tell you it wasn't changed. Now, another thing is if you just want to wipe everything out of Kubernetes, right? You just say, I'm done with Kubernetes. I need to wipe out my workloads and my configuration. I know when I'm testing, I do that a lot. I go hit reset here, and now it's stopping Kubernetes. This will take a little longer, but it's going to stop Kubernetes, wipe everything out, and then bring it back up. And it's starting. This will take a few seconds because it doesn't need to download it. Was there another question while this is starting up?
Yes, we have a bunch of questions queued up. We just got a question about this. So you were just showing upgrades and downgrades, and somebody wanted to clarify if that's only between major release versions or if they could. This is actually from Jerome. Hi, Jerome. So if you could go from like 121.3 to 121.2, something like that.
Yes, but as it's going backwards, it does wipe everything out.
Okay.
But yes, you can, any patch version you can switch between.
Okay, great. Let's see. Have you gotten to the image building piece of this yet? Because I've been answering questions. I haven't actually been paying attention to your demo.
Oh, yes. I did do image building. I did Scratch image, and I did keyboard and controller.
Perfect. So the question from Andres is, will this support Windows and Linux image builds?
It supports Linux Windows builds. Right now, it does not support other system builds. Windows, I don't know that we've looked into that. Figuring out the cross-platform builds is in our backlog. There's an issue filed. That's part of the Kim project, which is a different, it's another project at a rancher, but it is in our backlog to go figure that out. Right now, everything is just Linux.
Because even when you're running this on Windows, it's running in WSL2, so it's really running in Linux.
It's still a Linux build, even on Windows.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Do you want another question?
Quickly, I wanted to expand when Matt said when you downgrade that you lose all your workloads. I wanted to point out that we do keep the images around. It's just the Kubernetes workloads, but when you deploy it again, all the images are still there in the VM.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could just redeploy everything.
Yes, your images are there, everything's still there when you change version. It's the Kubernetes configuration that changes. That's a good point, Jan. It's the Kubernetes configuration that changes, right? Because you don't, if you're going and they added new properties or fields to Kubernetes, and to a resource, that works going forward, but going backwards, the old version didn't know about those, and you can run into issues. So it wipes out basically your database of stored information on Kubernetes. So Kubernetes doesn't know what to run.
Okay.
All right.
Last question, or well, still want one more? You let me know.
I was actually going to jump to a Windows demo here, but
okay,
we can do one more.
Take it away.
We got time.
No, take it away. We're not getting that many questions, so I'll save some for later.
So over here, you'll see I've got Windows running here, and this is not a VM. I'm screen sharing to a separate machine. But you'll see it does look a little different, but otherwise the setting's the same. So rather than being in the top right on Mac where you would see the Rancher desktop stuff here to switch contacts or get into preferences, on Windows, it's down here in the lower right corner, but otherwise it's the same things, switch contacts, preferences, and the preference window looks mostly the same, but there's a couple of differences. One is if you get into Kubernetes settings, you'll see that there are not any settings for your virtual machine. And that's because being WSL, Windows actually manages that for you. And so we're not mucking with Windows management of the virtual machine. But you also see WSL integration. And that's because we've made it possible. We look at if you're using WSL or have other distros, in this case, I've got OpenSUSE and Ubuntu. If you've got those, we give you the option of exposing your Kubernetes configuration in there if you want it. So that way we don't step on anything to let you work with Rancher Desktop right from in there. And I'll demo that in a minute. The other one here is there's one called port forwarding. On Windows or on Mac where the port forwarding happened automatically and I just demoed, it just worked. On Windows, it doesn't work that way. And so you'll actually click on something in order to force port forwarding to happen. You enable that here. We basically automate using kubectl to do the port forwarding and display it and make it easy, the click of a button. For this demo though, we'll come over to terminal here and I've got, this is PowerShell here, and right next to it, I do have an OpenSUSE, so you can see what's going on there. And in this case, we're gonna use Helm to install something into Rancher Desktop. And now this is Helm, Package Manager, install. WordPress is the name. We're installing the Bitnami WordPress. I'm setting the service type to node port. WordPress by default out of Bitnami comes with a load balancer by default, and that doesn't work in Rancher Desktop. There is no load balancer. It's not going to work in most of your local setups unless you somehow set up a load balancer. So I went with NodePort. And then the last two things are for volume permissions, because when you're dealing with host paths, sometimes there can be issues. And this is the Bitnami WordPress chart options to opt in to just make sure that those things are handled properly for permissions. And so I just always do that so I don't get a little issue here. And so it goes ahead and it's installing it. And the first thing you'll see is the new services are here for what you could possibly use. Now, let's go take a look at what's going on here. And if you'll notice, we'll go to a watch and we'll look at what's coming up here. And so here I'm looking at Kubernetes Control. And now this is on OpenSUSE. So before where I said we opted into it, OpenSUSE, it's checked. That's because my Kubernetes config and kubectl are all just there and they just work for me now. If I didn't check that checkbox, the Kubernetes config wouldn't be there. It wouldn't just work, but it does. And so now we're seeing these things start to come up. It's declarative. So while WordPress waits for Maria to come up, it doesn't come up before Maria comes up, but we'll wait a minute. And the other thing I'll do while this is going is I'm going to go grab the HTTP one and I'm just going to port forward it. And we'll go see to localhost. Nothing's come up yet, so it should just fail because nothing's up yet. And that's because the pods, they are not fully running yet. Maria has to come up first, and then WordPress can come up after Maria does. And we're just waiting. And so it didn't come up. The port forward is engaged, and there's the local port. But we have to wait for everything to be working before it can share anything. And now WordPress just works, port forwarding worked. All right, so that's what I had to quickly demo just to show the difference on Windows here and how to make all of that work. So Adrian, do we have more questions? That's mostly what I wanted to demo here. I can dig into other things if people have questions on it, but I'm ready for some questions.
All right, well, we don't actually have that many questions left. So those of you who are watching, if there's anything that you've seen that you want more information about, or if you'd like Matt to dive deeper into anything, get those questions in, because if we run out of questions, then this is going to be one of the short meetups.
Sorry, I'll do more demos.
More demos. Starting from the top, Victor would like to know if Rancher Desktop automatically lists all clusters like a Rancher endpoint URL. Not sure I understand that question. Is that
so Rancher Desktop, it creates right now creates a single node Kubernetes running in WSL or virtual machine. If you want to see all of your kube contexts, you can come here. There's Kubernetes context. It's off the settings. It just shows right now Rancher Desktop. But if you had your kube config, your what is it, home tilde/.kube/config file, the default one, to have 10 different clusters or contexts, it would list each one of those here under Kubernetes contexts. And if you switch between the graphical interface, that would change Helm, Kubernetes Control, and everything else in the version that it uses.
Great answer.
Change the default.
You understood the question.
Yeah, I think the point is that Rancher Desktop does not come with Rancher itself. So you could install Rancher on Rancher Desktop, but it does not have the Rancher functionality built in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did just think of one other thing when I was talking about Kubernetes Control there, that I don't know whether people will love it, hate it, or find interesting. But if I run Kubernetes Control version, you'll see the version here, right? So my client version is 122 for Kubernetes Control, and my server I've got running 121 right now, 121.3. And those are the version of Kubernetes Control is there. Now, Kubernetes Controls, all Kubernetes have only so many supported versions. All the parts, they only support so many different versions. And Kubernetes Control supports N+1 and N-1. So if you're running Kubernetes 119, the supported versions of Kubernetes Control are 118, 119, and 120. And outside of that, it's your best bet, right? Here, we will actually use a project called KubeRuler under the hood. And when you switch versions of Kubernetes, we always make sure you've got a supported version of Kubernetes Control running. So if I come back over to my preferences here, and I'm on 121. I'll just come back down to one, go to an old one, and we'll give it a minute. Oh, it does have to download it. So here you can see the downloading. I guess I had wiped everything out and forgot I didn't have this cached. But it is downloading the necessary resources in order to make this work. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask while this is going?
Yes. Jerome just came back with another question that, well, that's great. Jerome would like to know, if we want to help make it happen on Linux and or Apple Silicon, what do you need the most? Code contribs, tests, bug reports? Are there any architectural blockers that need to be figured out? Or do they just need to wait and see?
So architecturally, I think we have that figured out, because behind the scenes, we had to make it work for Mac and Linux. And so we have the ability to detect what environment you're in and then use the right backing services. What we probably need now is getting the virtualization environment running. So well, I guess there is one architecture. Do we just run K3s locally, or do we run it in a VM? Given the way we destroy and do things, we're actually going to run a VM even on Linux. So that way we don't mess with your local environment. And so that environment and how to run that on the back end probably needs to be worked out. We'll want to do everything probably QEMU based, just like we did on Mac. And then we can start tying in the front end to do those same things. But it's a matter of working out that back end. Jan would be the best person to talk to about that if you wanted to track him down. I know I'm volunteering him here, and he didn't know this was coming. If you wanted to reach out to him in the Rancher Slack that was shared earlier, there is a Rancher desktop room. And if you wanted to reach out there, that's probably the first step that needs to happen, is to figure out how to make all that work on Linux. And he's the best person to do it, because he's the person who's just handling that stuff and doing a terrific job, and he kind of knows how it should work and what he wants for all these things. All right, so I'll jump back into what I was demoing here. Now I switch version of Kubernetes, and I'm going to run Kube control. And what you'll see here, that keeps popping up, is my client version is a different version. It is now one that is supported on Linux. Or sorry, not Linux. I'm messing up my words here. It's now one that's supported with the server-side version. And it's all actually cached. It uses something called Kube Ruler. And you'll see there's a Kube Ruler directory after you've done this off your home directory. And you'll see it caches those different files here and then handles, when you called kubectl, redirecting to the proper one. And so that way we always make sure things are in sync. And that's going to matter, especially with things like server-side apply, and not, servers that don't have that anymore, Kubernetes clusters that don't have it, and Kube control doesn't need to support it. There's little things that come up along the way that can be bugs and issues. And so we've done that. Any other questions?
Yes, there are questions. I was just actually typing back to somebody who said that they were struggling to get their head around the idea of a single node cluster. This is from Mark. For those of you who also have that, single node cluster is a misnomer, which just basically means it doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. Every single Kubernetes cluster is called a cluster, and a cluster has some number of nodes. The minimum number of nodes in a Kubernetes cluster is 1. So yes, while single node cluster makes no sense whatsoever, that's just how we have to say it, because there's no other way. So, sorry. Let me jump up here to another question from Jerome. Let me just read this. Okay, so Jerome asks, with K3D kind or MiniCube, is it MiniCube or MiniCube?
I always called it MiniCube.
Okay. I just recently learned that it's not KubeCon, it's KubeCon, which makes no sense because it's Kubernetes, it's not Kubernetes. Anyway, I'll say MiniCube. So with K3D kind or MiniCube, we can provision clusters with multiple nodes, and we can provision multiple clusters side by side at the same time. Is that something that is or will be possible with Rancher Desktop?
So dealing with all of the different clusters tends to be more of an operator type function. or somebody who's managing clusters type thing. Most of the time, and granted there are exceptions, but for most people who are dealing with working on their workloads and getting things up and running in Kubernetes, and they're interested in those types of functionality, just this bare basic environment with just one worker is all they need. And so more complicated clusters than that isn't in our target use case right now. Now we may get to that down the road because some people do ask for it. But when we look at our target audience here, which is really going after people who want to run workloads, test workloads, get things up and running in here inside of Kubernetes, and they want the Kubernetes stand-up to be easy, that typical case doesn't require all those things. And so we're trying to make that work first and work really well before we get into those more complicated situations.
Good answer. All right, we've had 2 questions come in now. One from Eddie and I lost track of who the other one was from. But both of these relate to, Eddie specifically asks, is there a VS Code plugin? And the other person asked, is there any connection to any other IDE? And if not, is that something in the roadmap?
There is not now. Now, there are things such as the Kubernetes plugin, which will just work with this because it's a normal Kubernetes. That will just work out of the box. As far as something special above and beyond that, it's in the roadmap, but it doesn't exist yet. We've started to talk about it and brainstorm and figure out how we get there, but just hasn't happened.
So that would be something. If the Kubernetes plugin in VS Code just works because it's a Kubernetes cluster, then the something else would be what? Like deploying clusters within Rancher Desktop and changing versions, but doing that from VS Code?
Maybe something along the lines of with Kim and making the image management stuff better. A lot of the Docker stuff, if I remember right, looks for things like the Docker socket and things like that, which aren't exposed with Kim. And so it would probably be more around image management and stuff like that would be where we would go first.
Okay.
But I'm totally open to other ideas on it because that's just us trying to come up with ideas on what we would do.
And this is open source, so people can go to GitHub and submit issues and stuff as well.
Yeah, in fact,
so
all of it
I don't know if
is on GitHub. So
there you go. Yeah, cool. So if you want to contribute, if you have ideas, if you have questions, come join the community and get involved. Helio asks, with Rancher Desktop, can I still launch a container in a traditional way, like with a Docker or CTR command?
Yes, we thought about, do we do this ourselves and create something that does it? But Coop Control already has this. It's called Coop Control Run. And so, you know, we just figured this was probably the best way because it's the most well-supported and tried and true path. You can do that today. It does not follow the exact same syntax as Docker Run, but you can run something. Yeah.
Perfect.
And by the way, I was doing this with kubectl for Kubernetes 1.17. So this isn't something new. This has been around a long time to be able to do this.
So for the next person, I apologize if I say your name incorrectly. I'm going to do my best. I believe the name is Uri. And Uri asks, would it be feasible to add interfaces to mock storage classes?
I've never thought about this. I don't know.
Interesting question, right?
Yes, it is. For a lot of people who run workloads, they don't tend to think about storage classes. They just use whatever's configured for them. That's the default. That's probably the 80%. The ability to do that, though, is something that I don't think we've put much time or thought into. But if you'd like to see something like that, please go file an issue, and we can poke at it.
Yeah.
Or if you want to dig into that, we're always open to contributions.
Better. Yes. Yeah. Any ideas that you guys have? If you have the technical chops to implement any of that, go pull down the source code, start poking at it. If you come up with a solution, you know, start an issue, start a conversation, submit PRs. It's all about the community. Malcolm asks, I assume, well, not really asks, but Malcolm says, I'm assuming if I'm running WSL2, I can use Hipper instead of Helm.
Yes.
Totally.
For anybody who doesn't know, Hipper is another project coming out of SUSE that has to do with package management. It's kind of saying Helm does a really good job at package management if you're an end user, but Hipper deals with that cluster admin role and has some niceties around that to make that easier. And it's built on top of Helm and all of that, and so it should run here without problem. Personally, I work on both Hipper and Rancher Desktop, and so I test Hipper against Rancher Desktop whenever I do my day in and day out work.
Nice. More questions rolling in. Can you briefly run through what the installation requirements are for Rancher Desktop on both Mac OS and Windows? Any dependencies, resources, stuff like that?
Let's see, resources. You're going to need enough resources to be able to, of course, run the environment. So an 8 gig Mac might have issues if you're talking about RAM, just because that's so little when you want to run a virtual machine. Kubernetes is going to default. You need 2 on the bottom end. And if you want to run anything, you're going to need to go up from there. And so that's the thing to know. I think it's either the last 2 versions of macOS are the ones that are supported. If you go too old in macOS versions outside of their last 2, their supported versions, there are, I think, some issues because of the way we interact with VMs, although I don't know if that holds true anymore. I know there used to be under HyperKit. I'm not sure if there are under QEMU setup. I don't know that we've tested it, just the last 2 versions. But that would be about it. On the Windows side, you need to be able to run WSL v2. Again, it's just going to be the resource issues. I think I have a, somewhere I'll admit it, I have a Windows, this is the Go. It's the tiniest little thing they've got. And I've installed WSL2 on here. At one point, I had Rancher Desktop on here. You can't do much because the thing doesn't have any processing power or memory behind it, but it's all technically works. And so it should just work. That's our hope. And if you find a way that it doesn't, please file an issue so we can go take a look at it.
I've seen a couple of questions come through, so I think it's worth revisiting the architecture that Rancher Desktop delivers. So the questions that I'm seeing are people asking if it will deploy virtual machines, if I can deploy stuff in a cloud provider. If it sounds like they're not clear on the architecture. Can you just revisit that?
Yeah, certainly. So Rancher Desktop is it's not Rancher, the multi-cluster manager on your desktop. You can run Rancher in Rancher Desktop. This is probably a branding thing here. Rancher Desktop is more similar to MiniCube or Kind or Cube Solo or Docker Desktop or something like that, trying to do container management and give you a local Kubernetes environment really easily without thinking on your desktop. You can install and run Rancher inside of it, but it does not provide all of that cluster management that you get from Rancher itself.
Cool. Sorry, typing, I'm answering another question. Next. Oh, let's see, we answered that. Next. On Windows, is it possible to fix or choose the port forwarding bits? And then also to have that configuration persist after Rancher Desktop or the PC restarts? That's a question from Olivier.
As of right now, there isn't a way to have that persist. I've never really, we haven't thought about it. That would be a good feature request to put in.
Olivier has another question that I'll just bring out there. Oh, interesting. Olivier asks, do you plan to include on Rancher Desktop the Rancher UI so that we can better discover and see Kubernetes content within the UI?
Yes, so we have talked about if or when or how we would handle that for quite some time.
Right, yep.
And a lot of that's going to be open to the UI folks. So anybody who's following along will know before 2.5 there was one UI, then in 2.5 there was another UI, and all of this happened as SUSE Rancher came into SUSE, and SUSE and Rancher came together, and now there's a bunch of new UI people and UX people and some new stuff coming, and so I would say all of that is in a little bit of flux, but once that is in good shape and ready, these kinds of topics of conversation of how do you make this available on the desktop, make it easier. People have brought up tools like Lens or some of the others. Is something like that coming? We've got a lot of questions about it, and there have been a number of ideas internally. And I think eventually we'll figure something out, but I don't know when or what it's going to look like. But there is plenty of chatter on it.
Yeah, it's I replied to the question and I said it's an open discussion item. If any of you have any ideas about how that might look in your own workflows or the kinds of things that you might like to see, please open an issue and share those ideas with us, and we'll try to incorporate that feedback into the discussion that's going on. SUSE is a large company. There are lots of stakeholders in projects, and there's a lot of conversation about the best way to do things that combines everybody's needs.
What I will say is, you all may not have noticed this because it's the internals, but Rancher Desktop and Hipper and Cube Warden and the UI all fall within the same small part of SUSE. And so the people who work on those talk to each other on a really regular basis. So we are able to share ideas, figure out how we collaborate or can collaborate, and even talk about future things. So this stuff, when it comes up, it's something that I will be talking with folks about, and they may even be on here and listening and want to talk after too.
Lurkers. So real quick, we're rolling up on the top of the hour. We've still got a few questions. We're going to stay here until the questions are answered. And if you guys keep asking questions, then we're just going to keep staying here. But if you do need to drop, remember that this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be posted on the Rancher YouTube channel once I get it edited and up in the next day or two. And then I forgot to mention earlier that all attendees will also get a follow-up email with a link to the video when the video is available. So you don't have to go and check the channel, just keep an eye on your email and you'll get a link to that. So hopefully you can stay, but if you have to drop, thank you for joining us, and well, go and watch the video. Now back to the questions. Trying to pick the next one. Okay, so Uri asks, this is also an interesting question. I like questions because I like to see how people are thinking or how people are seeing this, and the questions that they have from their interpretation of the software that might be totally different from the kinds of things that we think about when we're using these things on a daily basis. And that's why we say there are no bad questions, because all of them are like, oh, that's really interesting. So Uri says, this runs K3S with Flannel, so therefore there's no support for network policies, correct?
That's a great question, and that's probably right.
So if I could ask an extension to that, is there any way to change the runtime configuration of K3S to use something else? Calico, Cilium?
That's probably getting a bit under the hood. So every time we change things, we're making all kinds of changes into K3S and the way it started. Some of that is buried inside of, this is an Electron app, and so the application is a bundle of business logic written in JavaScript and TypeScript with some Go applications and things like that in there. There's a number of things buried in there and some configuration files. Right now, there's no nice way to make that kind of change, and I'm not sure offhand if that's buried in business logic or in those template files. Because even if it was built into the template files and you altered them for K3S, then it would be the kind of thing, I'm just thinking off the top of my head that every time you upgraded, you'd have to deal with that again. But this is something that might be good to bring into Slack there, or to bring in as a feature request. And we could go look at it. And offhand, I can't remember. Somebody like Mark or Eric might remember if it's built into configuration files or if it's in coded business logic. Because they wrote most of that.
I don't believe we did anything at all on that front, so I think just came with K3S by default.
Now, the target audience for Rancher Desktop is for developers. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you were to apply a Kubernetes configuration that included network policies to the cluster, would it fail, or would the network policies just be ignored?
I don't know offhand how
I don't know
Kubernetes would react to that. Yeah, I don't know.
I think, though I haven't tested it, I think the network policies would just be ignored. I think since they're Kubernetes stock resources, you could still apply them and it'll just be like, whatever, I don't have, like it hands it off to the CNI and the CNI can't actually do anything with it. So it just says whatever.
You're probably right.
In which case, yeah, so in which case, where I'm going with this is if you're doing development against Rancher Desktop and you're using manifests that you would apply on a production cluster where network policies apply, you're probably not going to use Rancher Desktop to test the security of the communication between the various components. If you need to do that level of stuff, then I think that also kind of pushes out of developer and more into an operations role. Then you may be better suited having just a direct K3S cluster with multiple nodes, because you also would want to test multiple node communication and things like that. Or you can just continue to do your development here and it'll work fine, and then incorporate the network policy component into your QA bits out somewhere else before it goes out into production. Can you, Matt, talk about the timeline for a stable or GA release of Rancher Desktop?
Not really. Not really. Yeah, some of this is going to depend on when we get to feature complete and what we think that will be.
Right.
And so we haven't figured it out. For example, we've already decided we want Apple Silicon support before we go GA, but does Linux support come before GA? We haven't figured that out. People brought up questions about the Rancher dashboard, and would we have something like that here? We haven't worked that out. If it's going to be something that fits in here and we want it before GA, then of course that extends it out. And so we haven't worked out what that GA scope is going to be. I think we're going to hit beta here in the next, well, I hope to hit beta before KubeCon. And then a lot of it's going to be, what do we decide is in a 1.0 release that we say is stable, and then what's out of it. And we haven't gone through that full exercise yet. And so I can't really say the timetable yet. But if we go beta probably around this KubeCon, and if we were smart and did conference-driven development, what's next spring for conferences? That might be the most likely candidate.
The next KubeCon?
Yeah.
And KubeCon?
So that might be, like, if I were just thinking off the top of my head and I wanted to make a splash, that's the kind of thing I would do. But the truth is we have not figured what's in and what's out to know when that would be. But I think we're going to go beta here shortly because I think it's ready for that.
One of the things about doing software development in the open, because all of our stuff is free and open source, is that you can go and use these things. And I've seen Rancher stuff reach a decent level of stability well before it gets to beta or GA. It may not be feature complete, but and of course your mileage may vary, and while it's in an alpha state, things may change unexpectedly and all of that stuff. So I would not say build a production dependency on this, but as it's Rancher Desktop, we're trying to solve a local development issue, and you're already operating in a development environment. So I would encourage you to just bring it down and start doing your development against it and see if it solves problems or resolves issues or has a fewer pain points or whatever the marketing term you want than any other solution that you're currently using. The objective here is to give you a way to do Kubernetes development that's fast, that's flexible, that's easy, that makes Kubernetes more accessible for developers. And I would just speculate that most of the audience will be able to use it effectively long before it hits those stable GA milestones.
Yeah, and I think the way you bring it up as well, when I look at this, hitting something like GA won't be about stability. It's about when is it going to be feature complete, and we're talking about adding some other features. While your mileage will vary, this is what I use for all of my local development. I don't even have Docker installed, so I can't run Kind or K3D or any of those things now on this system. And that's how I do my day-to-day, whether I'm developing on this, testing Hipper, I'm a Helm maintainer, working on Helm, working in any of these things. I'm just using this now, and it's been sufficient for me. So there is that.
When Cortez arrived at the New World, he allegedly burned his ships, so they had no way forward. That's the development procedure that Matt follows. It's like, I can't even fall back onto Docker. I just deleted it.
Well, I had to wipe the system at one point and just start with a brand new OS. There were some things that were wrong with it, and that was just the easiest way to fix it. And after that, when I just burned it all down, I just never reinstalled Docker after that.
Good move. It's the immersion strategy.
Yeah.
Is there any talk about having Rancher Desktop get donated to the CNCF?
Maybe. I mean, it's mostly using CNCF projects right now. Containerd, K3S, things like that. Maybe. I'm not opposed to it. We'll just have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have 3 more questions. So if we get through those and no new questions appear, new questions always appear, then we'll be wrapping up in a few minutes. But if you have any questions, if you've been hesitant to ask, now's your time to get them in. First up, we have a question from Pedro, who would like to know if there is any plan to add Kubernetes cluster status to the Rancher Desktop GUI.
I have not thought about that. So no, there is no plan. If that's something you'd be interested in, please go and file a feature request. But no, that had not occurred to us. Like so many other things. So many things have not occurred.
Okay, next up, we actually have only one more question.
Okay.
There have been some questions going back and forth that I've been answering about the ability to use registries other than Docker Hub. And I was answering that from the Kubernetes operator perspective and saying, oh, it's a Kubernetes cluster. Just create your image pull secrets and you can pull your images from everywhere. But Mike just came back with a follow-up that makes me think he's talking about Kim. And since, as I said earlier, I answer questions and I don't pay attention to your demo, sorry. If he's asking a question about being able to push to a different registry, is that something that within Kim? Do you understand the question?
I understand the question. So Kim right now only has the ability to work with public things. So if I go to Kim, you won't see anything like log in, log out, and do that stuff. It should work if you've already logged into the registry with Docker. It should just automatically work and be able to push and pull. But if you've never logged in or logged out, you won't see that capability here. As far as Kim features go, that ability to log in, log out, and deal with private registries is the next feature on deck. I think the work may have been started on it already because that's the next thing that's coming. So if that helps. But if you already have logged in with Docker, Kim should work and be able to use that. If not, it's a bug. But the whole thing's going to be fixed up as we move towards the Kim having the full ability to log in and log out.
Okay. Well, the last question isn't really a question, but it's a statement, and it's from Olivier. And Olivier says, this isn't a question, but I just want to say thanks. You do a great job. I trust Rancher Desktop. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. Okay, so that's it for questions. I don't even know if I still have PowerPoint open to show my thank you slide.
Hold on, let me stop sharing.
Oh, there are questions next to it. Oh, I do have a closing slide. Okay, let me hijack the presentation. Make presenter. And let's show PowerPoint. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Matt, for an amazing demo of Rancher Desktop and explanation of everything. Thank you to Jan and I lost the names of the other people. Jan and Eric and Mark, who joined and were answering questions. Thank you to all of you who joined today. And I want to invite you to join us in the next meetup, which is in September. It'll be on September 15th. And there we're going to give you a demonstration of the new SUSE Rancher 2.6. Enterprise ready Kubernetes. If you already know Rancher, you know what we do, but there are some amazing things coming in 2.6 that I personally am excited to be able to show you. So for more information on that, you can go to this link down here, or you can, they should really give us shorter links. How am I supposed to say that? Where else can they find this? This is on the SUSE events page, right? Right, Matt?
I think so. I think everything's on the SUSE events page. When I went looking for this one, it was there.
Okay. So go to SUSE.com, look for events. You can find registration there, or probably you'll get a follow-up email that indicates where you can go and do this. So with that, we are done. You can learn more about Rancher Desktop directly from rancherdesktop.io or the GitHub repository. One last check. We have no further questions. So with that, we are out of here. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you next time.